All right, so we are going to talk about determining your essential standards. Is going to be the very first thing that you'll want to focus on. And so this is my email address. So if you need to contact me or you have questions as you're getting started, please feel free to reach out. I was very lucky to have someone to help me coach me along the way. So if you guys get started and you're having questions, don't hesitate. I will try to answer anything I can. So I have been principal for 5 years. So I'm not been doing it for a long time, but I am a cohort 2 school. So we just finished our 3rd year in the grant. And so we're going into sustainability. So I'm excited about that, to sustain what we've been doing. And this was a big part of the work that we've done over the last 3 years. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, what is a guaranteed viable curriculum? And why do you need this guaranteed and viable curriculum? And one of the reasons is we had to focus on ensuring that all of our students were getting the same knowledge, because when we started this, we did have some teachers that weren't on board with the collaboration and they're like, I'm going to go in my room and I'm going to shut my door and I'm going to teach the standards I'm going to teach, because there's no way to get through every standard you're supposed to teach in all the subjects you're supposed to teach them. And so they were all teaching different things. So our kids as a grade level and as a school were not getting the same knowledge and skills because each teacher was focusing on different things. And we had to shift the focus from teaching, because I did have teachers come to me like, well, I taught that. If they didn't learn it, I don't know what else to do. Hey, Julie. And so we had to shift from talking about I taught it and move on to, did they learn it? And if they didn't, what do we do? But if you don't have essential standards, then you don't have a way to really focus in on what did they learn, which ones are we talking about if they learned, and having time to actually talk about what to do if they didn't learn it. So everything we're going to talk about today is going to focus around that question number 1. What do we want students to know and to be able to do?
So since I have the privilege of a one-on-one, let me ask you, in those kind of difficult conversations, how do you get the teachers to buy into what you're talking about here? So they, you said you had some that were very, well, I'm going to teach this and I'm going to do this my way. So I guess my question is, how do you shift the way of thinking to being on board with something like this?
One of the first things you're going to have to do is build shared knowledge of what the process is. And so when Sarah was talking earlier, you really need, if you don't have this book, you've got.
I've not gone through word for word, but I've read a majority of it. So.
And all of my staff members have this book as well. And so we would read portions out of this book and talk about the why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we collaborating? Why do we pick essential standards? That was one of the things we talk about with my core team, which is my assistant principal and my 2 instructional facilitators. When we meet, we talk about a thing we call 10,000 conversations. And for those important things, we have to keep reminding ourselves that we're going to have the why conversation at least 10,000 times to really get it to sink into why we're doing this, why is it important, and to make sure that we're not just saying you're doing it because we're told you. You're told to, because before we got here, a lot of the things that our teachers were told to do, they weren't told the why. They were just told you have to do this, but no one gave them a good reason, like, okay, just because you said so is not good enough, And so this book helped us with that, and we read it, portions of it together. We talked about it. We looked at the other research that went around it that you can find in this book. And so that helped steer that conversation to why we're doing essential standards. Why is it important? Because we did have a teacher lottery before we started this process, where parents would come in and go, I want that teacher. And so it has taken us 3 years to move away from that. This is the first year, well, last year was COVID, so it was a little bit different, but this is really the first year where we're not taking any parent requests. Like, we are putting our kids where we need them in the classes we need them, because we can guarantee more now than ever before that our kids are going to learn the same essential skills in every class. Still gives teachers autonomy how to teach it, but that the skills they're going to learn are going to be the same no matter which teacher they get. And we couldn't say that before. And so that's one of those why, like, you're going to have it. And we've pulled out this book multiple times over the last 3 years to go back to that conversation when a team is having trouble. We would go back, okay, let's go back to what we learned and what the research is telling us of why this is important, and let's do that. And so those conversations have to come first before you even start picking essential standards and what that looks like. You've got to have that learning conversation with your staff first. And we did it in small teams. So we didn't do it staff-wide to begin with when we were doing these essential standards and stuff. We did it during the year, during our collaborative team time, embedded it during the day. And so having those smaller conversations made it easier to really talk with those teams. So you're going to start there with all of it. And one of the conversations you're going to have with your teams is this conversation right here. What is loose in a professional learning community and what is tight in a professional learning community. And there's an awesome chart in this book about the 6 tight elements, because one of those is that you have to have a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And that is part of your why. If we are going to be a professional learning community, we have to guarantee this curriculum, and it has to be viable, and it has to be done unit by unit. But you can't do any of those things until you pick those essential standards, because everything you're building it on is based on those essential standards. So tight, non-negotiable, we have to do it as a team and pick those essential standards. The loose is what the standards are. So like the teachers are going to choose those. They're going to have that conversation. They're going to get to pace out how you're going to teach them through the year. They're going to decide as a team what proficiency looks like for that standard. So there are choices that they get to make, but it is non-negotiable that they actually pick essential standards and stick to that. And so that's one of those why conversations that you have to prep them for this process is what's tight and what's loose. So they know this is what I expected, but here's where we get our voice and here's where we get our say as a team in making those decisions. So when we talk about guaranteed and viable, guaranteed comes from you've established which is essential, and viable means that you actually have time during the year to actually teach and intervene or extend on those essential standards, because it's not viable if you can't actually, a teacher can't actually make this happen. And that's been one of those things that has made choosing essential standards an ongoing process. We've done it probably every year. So we did it once, we chose which one are essential and which one are supporting. But then the next year, we did it again because we realized in some teams, we chose too many. There was no way to guarantee we can teach all of those that we chose. So we had to do it again. And then COVID hit and we had to do it again because we had even less time with our kids. And so we're looking at them again and saying, okay, which ones are the essential of the essential? And so like it is an ongoing process, and we're getting to go back to more of a regular environment in school next year. And like my second grade team at the end of the year has already said, look, when we get together this summer, one of the first things we want to do is we want to look back at those essential standards and relook at them again. Because as they've taught them, as they've built their units and taught their units, they're like, this one's not so essential, but this one over here that we didn't choose really is. So that's another conversation that, you know, you realize as you go is that it is not, oh, I checked it off, we have essential standards. It's we're going to have to revisit those as we go, because that viable part is really important. Because if you choose too many, there's no way for it to be viable, because you're back again to coverage instead of learning. Because that's where we were. We were covering a bunch of things, but our kids weren't learning anything. So how do you do it? So one of the things is I'm going to talk you through our process of how we agreed on what was priority. And then the next step from that is you unpack each of those. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like too. and then you pace them out, you build units, and then you have to commit to actually doing it. Because I've had to have conversations, individual conversations with teachers where, it's like, look, you agreed as a team that this is what was going to be essential and we're going to teach it. You have to actually go in your room and do this. Like, if you don't agree that this is where, then you need to bring it up to the team and we need to have a team discussion again. But if the team builds a consensus, this is what we're going to do, then this is what we're going to do. And so that's kind of part of the hard part of our job as the principals, having that accountability piece when they're not following through and being able to have those conversations with them when they're not. And we are still working on accountability because I want them to hold each other accountable before they come to me to hold them accountable. But that's been very hard for some of them, is to hold each other accountable and tell their peers, like, no, we agreed on this, you have to do this, because that's harder for some than it is for others. So that's still a work in progress for us, is holding each other accountable. But if you're going to do all this work, you have to commit to actually using it, or it's going to be one of those things, well, they made us do it, we're done, I'm going to go back in my room and do whatever I want to again. So holding each other accountable, and then you being there to hold them accountable, is just as important too. We created this chart, has the 4 essential questions on it, to give teams an idea of what they should be doing with each of those questions. And so I had the opportunity to work with Rich Smith. He's a Solution Tree associate in my first year of doing this. And he had a chart that was similar to this. We just changed it based on what was working for us. And so this first question up here, what is it we want students to know and be able to do? These are the steps of what that looks like. We determine our essential standards. We determine a common understanding of what that standard means. We determine learning targets, and then what does proficiency look like? So our teams knew when we're talking about question number 1, these are the things that we should be talking about for question number 1. And then we mapped out question number 2, 3, and 4. So when they're meeting as a team, and you heard the others talk about earlier of really making sure that your team is focusing on these 4 things, this helped them know what some of those things go underneath, and make sure we have a common language of what each of these questions actually mean and the behaviors that go into actually doing those questions. So we actually have this chart hanging up in each of our collaboration rooms, so that it helps the teachers focus their team meetings to make sure they're actually talking about one of these things. And if we're focusing on a specific question, making sure they're focusing on what we agreed that question was actually talking about. And so that first question, there's a reason they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. You have really got to do them in that order. And so the first thing is determining these essential standards. So what is essential is your must know, and then you're going to have your supporting, your good to know. Your must know standards are those like, we can't leave this grade level without our kids knowing this thing, because they will not be successful in the other grade levels above us if they don't know this thing. An easy example of that in kindergarten is that they can't leave kindergarten if they don't know their letters and their sounds. Like, that's really important in order to go to first grade. And so that makes it essential. And I'll give you some criteria here in a minute to help your teams focus that conversation about that. But that's basically what we called ours, essential and supporting. Some of them called them must know, some of them call them good to know. You're going to hear both languages, but in our school, we called them essential and supporting. And so when we're looking at our standards, that's the very first thing we did. Which of these are essential and which of these are just good to know? And we're going to teach them, but we're not going to assess of them, or we're not going to intervene on them. If it's essential, we're going to assess it, and we're going to intervene until the kid gets it. And that means sometimes you're intervening over and over and over on a standard, but we want to guarantee that they get it. So that's going to be an intervention for us. And so it has to be essential for us. This quote always gets me, and it just sums up what it really means. Teachers are not creating a list but building shared knowledge of what the most important skills, concepts, and understandings are that will result in higher levels of achievement. This is about focus, focus, and focus. Because it's not a checklist of, okay, we got our essentials. The conversation they have as they're choosing the essentials builds their knowledge so much more. One of the things that my teachers will tell anyone that asks about this is that we know now more about our standards than we ever have before, because we have sat as a team and discussed which is essential, which is not, and then exactly what those essential standards mean by breaking them down. And they've learned, I had one, let's see, was it first grade, actually realized they were teaching the second grade standard instead of the first grade standard once they had a team discussion about what those standards actually meant and which ones were essential and which ones were not. And so like we had a big hole in our curriculum vertically because they never talked about the standards before as a team. And so they didn't even realize that they were teaching something that was actually a second grade standard instead of a first grade standard. And so they feel much more confident now about their standards than they ever have before. And that has helped build their confidence in the classroom when they're teaching it. Because there were some standards they would skip before because they didn't quite understand what it meant and what it could look like. And some of them were so new, they were too afraid to ask anyone and let them know that they didn't know what it looked like. But now they have a team that's doing this work together. And we've built that culture that it's okay to say, yeah, I don't know what that means. Like, so let's go find out, because we've had to dig out, some books and look at other things and really look at what does this actually mean? How would we break this down? And doing it as a team has made them feel more comfortable and then more confident when they go back to their room and they're teaching their kids, because now they all know what it means and they're all on the same page about what that means. So how do you do it? Okay, so the first step is that you are going to use a criteria called REAL. That's the criteria we used, and it really helped us to identify which standards are essential. And so your teams are going to reach consensus, because there are going to be times when not everyone is going to agree. But when we reach consensus, what we mean is that everyone has had a chance to say why they think something, and then we did it by vote. And so majority ruled. And so if the majority of the grade level said it's essential, or the majority of the grade level says it's not essential, everyone agrees, and that's how we're going to move forward. So there are going to be times where it could be possible where not everyone is in 100% agreement. But if you have reached consensus, that's what you're going to do and move on, because there will be times when not everyone's going to be on board. And so, but you can't stop there and you can't get stuck there. And so then you're going to make sure you're looking at your testing things and things. Maybe there are some things that might be district required, looking at all that as you're choosing your essentials. You're going to find a way that works for you to record which ones are essential and which ones are supporting. And then you've got to make sure that you don't have any big gaps from kindergarten to first grade to second to third to fourth, So you got to have that vertical alignment too. And I'll be honest, we did not do that the first year we did essential standards. The first year we just did it by grade level, and we didn't actually vertically align it until the next year. We just weren't there yet. We were just getting comfortable with working it out as ourselves as a team, much less trying to work with another team to, see if we had any large gaps. So don't think you have to do everything all at once, because it's a lot. So, take it step by step as you do it, and it's okay not to. So we didn't do that until the second year. And we did find some gaps. And so we had to go back to the grade levels, because they did it as each team picked a couple people from their team to put on a vertical alignment team and brought their essential standards. And we just laid them out, and they looked at them step by step, and they realized that first grade didn't have something essential that kindergarten and second grade did. So they had a big gap in there. And so they had to go back to their first grade team and say, we need to relook at this standard because everyone else is saying it's essential but us. And then they, after they had that conversation, they filled in that gap and they're like, right, we missed that one. I don't know how we missed that the first time around, but we did. And so they made it essential. But it really
so looking at the beginning part of the slide, it says they're going to use criteria to identify 7 to 12 or approximately 1/3 of the state standard per grade level. So do you set, like, did you come in and just set a number and say?
We did not. Now,
okay.
When I've done this presentation a couple of times with some school principals and who they were working with did set a number. I did not. I didn't tell them that there's this magic number because there's really not. But in Learning by Doing, they do recommend like 8 to 12. But I didn't set any number because I didn't want a preconceived notion of what was essential and what was not. I'm like, we've reached our 12. This one can't be essential.
Yeah, but then you start getting into the viable side of things. Is it doable?
Yes. And so that's the conversation you have. So like when you picked in the kindergarten, I don't know, they tried to pick everything as essential. So we let them the first time they did it, and then we put them all out and said, okay, do you really think that you can teach these? The kids can learn them. You can intervene when they don't learn them. All of these, all in the 9 months that you have the kids. Can you do that? And they're like, oh, wait a minute. Let me take a few more of those out. Maybe they're not as important as we thought.
Yeah. Start prioritizing things and actually looking at what is truly essential.
Yes. And sometimes that doesn't happen until the next year when you've been teaching them and you're like, holy cow, we thought we could do this, but we can't.
Right.
And so that's why year after year, we've looked at our essential standards again, just to make sure, did this really work out? Or we still have too many? Or is there something we're missing? Do we need to add something that we didn't have? Because as we taught, we realized there's a gap. So there is a recommended number in here, but I didn't want to give them this preconceived notion that there was some magic number out there that makes it work, because each school will tell you it's different, because your kids are going to be different than my kids. And so what they're going to come to school with is going to be different than what your kids are going to come to school with. And so our essentials are going to be different. And that's a conversation we had to have, because they're like, can't we just take someone else's essential standards and do that? I'm like, nope, those kids are not our kids. And so we can't do that. We have to look at what we know, and you are going to build your knowledge based on the conversation we have. And you can't have a conversation if you just take someone else's essentials.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think about that.
They will ask. They're like, didn't someone else already do that? Yeah, lots of people have done it, but our kids are different. That's what we use every time. Our kids are our kids, and they are not the same as anybody. Even the kids that are around us in the districts around us, our kids are ours. And so we've got to do it for our kids. So here is real. Here are the 4 criteria we use to really determine, is this standard essential? So the first one is readiness. And under readiness, you really want to talk about, does this standard prepare students for the next level? So it could be the next grade level, or my kids leave us at 2nd grade, so preparing them for elementary, because our elementary is 3-5. So like, are the kids leaving us being prepared to go to elementary and succeed? So is it something that they'll need for the next grade level? Is it a prerequisite for the next grade level? Like if they don't have this, there's no way they can succeed in the next step. And then the E is endurance. Will they have to retain it beyond this grade level? So will it help them when they get to high school? Is it going to endure? Is it useful beyond the unit that it's taught in? Like, so within your grade level, are you going to need this skill to know another skill in your grade? Because if you are, it's going to be essential, or you're not going to be able to do the next skill in that grade level. And then the third is assessed. And will this help for, let's be honest, ACT Aspire is important. So more, for your BIM since you have third and fourth grade, but is this going to help them be successful on those high stakes exams? Is this going to help them be successful on that? Or we take iStation. I don't know what your K2 is using in your building.
iStation.
Okay, so we also look at it. Is it going to help them be successful on that? So is it going to be assessed in something else beyond your grade level that it's in there? So looking at that is just as important. And then L is leverage. Will they be able to apply this in more than one subject area? So if we're talking literacy standards, are they going to be able to apply it in math and science and social studies? If we're talking math, same thing. Are they going to be able to apply it in science, social studies? If they're going to be able to apply it in more than one subject area, then it's important that it's essential because you're going to use it in multiple areas. We added our own question because sometimes we get stuck. We talk about these 4, but then they still weren't sure. And so I asked them a question: would you intervene on this? Like when they were really on the fence of whether it was essential or supporting, I said, would you pull a small group of kids and reteach this skill in a different way? And that kind of helped push them over the fence when they weren't sure on a standard, because sometimes they're like, no, we would not do a small group on that, because if you're not willing to pull a small group for it, it's not essential. We're going to teach it, but we're not going to intervene on it. If we're not going to intervene on it, it's not an essential skill. And so we added our own little question after that, because there were a few, they're like, because some were just stuck on, like in second grade, grammar was a thing that they got stuck on, nouns, verbs, stuff like that. And I'm like, you going to pull a kid back to a small group because they can't tell you that dog is a noun? And they're like, no. I said, then it's supporting. We're going to teach what nouns are. We're going to teach what verbs are. But it's more important, can they write a sentence and write a paragraph than it can be if they can tell me that that's a noun. And they're like, right. And so it helped go, okay, we're going to put that in supporting instead of we're going to put it in essential. Why do you have to do this as a team? This cannot be something that is handed down to them. I'm lucky in my district that we get a lot of autonomy. I'm the only, we only have one school per grade. So we have pre-K to 2, 3, 5, we have a 6-8 building and a 9-12 building. So we don't have to coordinate between other elementary or primary schools. It's just us. And so we get a lot of autonomy in what we do. But I know in other districts, that's not how it works. So, but your teams have got to have this as a team discussion, and they've got to make those priorities as a team. It cannot just be handed to them. It loses all of its power and ownership if it does. That's the biggest thing, is it will lose its ownership if it's not. And they need clarity on what these standards are. And if they're not having that discussion, they're not going to get that clarity, and they're not going to be committed to the process of creating common assessments, of building the units together, if they didn't even get to choose their essential standards and what that looked like. We've already talked about that. And so this is a quote that I love. It says, without involvement, there's no commitment. Mark it down, asterisk it, circle it, underline it. No involvement is no commitment. And that's from Stephen Covey. And it is so true. This whole, anything you do with the PLC at work process, if they are not involved in it, they will not be committed to it. And so it's more than just buy-in. And I've got to hear Anthony Mohammed talk multiple times. And if you ever get to hear him, please do. He's amazing. But one of the things he says is buy-in is not what we're looking for. I don't care if you buy in. I want to know, are you committed to what we're doing? Commitment is what we're looking for, not that we're going to buy into something. So that's just something that's helped us really move forward. Are we committed to what we're doing? So here's what it actually looked like in our school. You can see the readiness, endurance assessed leverage. This is a poster that we still have hanging in our collaboration rooms because we still talk about our essential standards. But we started there. Here's the 4 criteria that we're looking for. And we are definitely primary and elementary. We literally cut apart, you can see here, we cut apart each of the standards. And we literally, you can see us working here. This is my 2nd grade team. And we are talking about each standard one at a time. And we had sticky notes, supporting and essential. And we literally grouped them one, at a time. We cut them out because we were very hands-on. We need to touch things and hold things. And so we did this. Now, we did this during the day. I know some schools do this like in the summer, or they have time in their schedule for the whole team to meet. I have too many teachers per grade level where that I can put them all together at once during the day. They do have collaborative team times. They're just like kindergarten is separated in 2 groups. 1st grade is 2 groups. 2nd grade is 2 groups. So they did this in their individual groups. And then we came together after school and each group compared. And we're like, oh, hey, we were on the same page with all these were essential and all these were supporting. But here's a few where each team was not on the same page. And then as a whole team, we just discussed those few because the rest, they were on the same page of this is essential and this is supporting. So that's how we did it because I didn't have time during the day. Subs are very hard to get in my part of the state. And so, I don't have enough paras to make that happen either. And so this is how we had to do it to make it work because my whole team can't meet all together at once. But this is literally, and then we taped them to chart paper because that is who we are first. And so we sorted them on the table and then taped them to chart paper before we moved it into an electronic version. But this is literally what we did for each standard. Transparency, we only did literacy the first year. They teach everything, and it would have been too overwhelming for them to try to tackle literacy and math at the same time. And so the very first year we did this, we only tackled literacy and determining the essential and the supporting. We just weren't there yet. We weren't ready to do both. We needed to get one under our belt first. And literacy is what our focus, our school-wide focus was. So that's where we chose that one first. And I think for us, that really helped us narrow our focus and get good at the process before we tried to apply it to math. And so
I think that's a good thing. That can be a really good thing, just focusing in on one thing at a time and letting, just kind of like we do with students, letting them master that and get completely comfortable with that. I like that.
Yeah. So, some teams were ready. They tried to tackle both, but my teachers have to teach everything. And so they weren't ready to tackle. We were barely ready sometimes to tackle literacy. So one step at a time, we did literacy, and that's all we focused on the whole first year was getting literacy where we wanted it. And then we started tackling math the next year. And that worked for us, and it didn't seem so overwhelming for them because this is an overwhelming process. And so try to make it as less overwhelming as you can. That's one of the steps that we did to make that happen. But we did that in every grade level, focused on literacy, divided them, supporting, and essential. And then we transferred it to an electronic document. So this is what the document actually looks like. We divided it by, the domains in each one. And then we put just essential on one side and supporting on the other. And then this essential standard, each essential standard, we broke down. So that's an actual link that they can click on, and it goes to that standard. So let me show you. Here's the 2nd grade. So here's what 2nd grade actually looks like. So reading, literature, here's our essentials, here's our supporting. And we just did it for each sub. There's writing, speaking and listening, language. And that way everyone has access to it. We do everything through Google. So each team has a shared drive. So I have a 1st grade team drive, a 2nd grade team drive, and then kindergarten has a team drive. And in their team drive, this is where everything they work on is housed. And so we have a folder that says essential standards. And then here's their second grade, here's their literacy ones, here's their math ones. So it's all housed in one place and it's easy for everyone to find it. So then once we chose our essential standards, the next thing that they did is they broke down that standard. And so what they would do is they took that standard, and here's the template we use, and they just put the standard up there. What are some prerequisite skills that a student would need before they can tackle that standard? Then we broke it down between what do they need to know, what are the skills they need to be able to do, so the nouns and the verb from the actual standard. What are important vocabulary that the teacher's going to need to teach, or is there important vocabulary the teacher needs to know, not necessarily the kid has to know to do it, but to make sure that each teacher is on the same page about what this word means, because we found that there were some words that they weren't on the same page of what it actually meant. And so having that common definition helped. And then we broke each standard up here down into learning targets. We call them our I can statements, but these are the individual skills they need to master in order to master this whole standard. And then here's what proficiency looks like. So the goal is a 3, that's proficient. And then 4 is that above, and then you have your 1 and your 2. When we did proficiency, we started with the 3. We built what does mastery look like? And then we went to what does above mastery look like? And then we did 1 and 2. That seemed to be easiest for our teachers to grasp. So if they know what mastery looks like, then they can get the levels below and above it. And the levels below it were a little bit harder to do than what actually mastery looks like. So these took more conversation. What's the difference between a 1 and a 2 than it did to get to a 3 and a 4. But after they did this, they knew so much about this standing than they ever have before. And so when they teach the standard, they have this document to come back to. They can look at the I can statements, look about where they are in the process. What does mastery actually look like? And this helps when they're building their units. But this is the first step, is to have essential and supporting, and then you break down each of those essential. You'll see over here in our supporting column, we do have some that were broken down. These were ones that were once essential and got moved to supporting after we've done it multiple times. So, you know, it's still, the breakdown is still there, but it's just moved into the supporting column instead of the essential one. So that's kind of how you know we've done it multiple times, because some of those you can see have moved from one place to the other. But that's really helped us know as a grade level. And then we took these documents and vertically aligned. So they took this document and they went to the team with kindergarten, first and second, and said, okay, let's look at these. Do we have any big gaps in what we're doing?
So I have to ask, with that document that you were just on, is there any way like I could see that document, like if you could share it or anything like that? I mean, I know that your essential standards are going to be different from mine, but the format and how you have it arranged and the organization of it is what I'm really after.
Yep. Yeah, put your email in the chat box.
Okay.
I will share them with you.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, yeah, because we actually, this format came from our coach, and this format actually came from a school in West Memphis. I'm friends with the principal there. We did Master Principal Institute with ALA together, and she was actually in cohort 1, so she started before I did. And so when I started, I said, hey, what kind of templates you got that can help?
Yeah, because I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah, so she shared this template right here. She shared with me, and so we revised it. It doesn't quite look the same as the one she shared because we've had to change it to fit us, but it gave us a place to start instead of starting from scratch from something.
Absolutely.
So yes, no, I will share all of these with you. Okay, so we didn't just do this with our grade level teams, because we also have our specialty area teachers. And I'll be honest, we have not done as good of a job with our special area teachers, art, music, library, as we have with our grade level teams. That is something we are still working on. I gave them the option when we first started this process. Do you want to be a team together, or do you want to work with a grade level team? Because I didn't want to make that decision for them. So that's up to you and how you want to do that. But they chose to be a team together. And so I didn't want to leave them out of what we're doing as well. So I met with them and I led them through the process of choosing essential standards in their grade level. And so you can see, again, we are very cut and paste, hands-on kinds of people. So this is my librarian here. We're in the library, and this is her trying to decide which ones were need to know and which ones were just nice to know. And so then over here, you have my counselor trying to do the same thing. These two were my interventionists at the time. And so what we did with them is we gave them kindergarten, first and second grades, essential standards. And we said, okay, how can you help get our kids to this essential standard? Where do you come in this process, and what you do with your interventions, because they followed a specific program. And so looking to see which essential skills they focused on, so that they can see, okay, the grade level says this is important, we need to do that in our interventions with our kids. And so they were looking at that, and then my art teacher doing the same thing, what's good to know and what's essential to know in art. So I didn't want to leave them out of this process that we're doing, because their content is just as important as our grade levels, and they get left behind sometimes. And I only have one of each. I have one art teacher, I have one music teacher, one librarian, so one PE teacher. So they all had to do it. So it was interesting for PE, but
Yeah.
because the coach was like, I'm doing what again? But we did it all the same with them. So they had the same knowledge, and they were going through the same processes that our grade level teams were going through as well. But we're still trying to figure out how to make them a better team and do better team. I don't know. We're still working. We haven't figured out special areas yet.
It's tough because I'm in the same boat as what you're saying. We have one art teacher, one music teacher, so on and so forth. And so it's challenging.
And one thing we've done also is, so they did this and they have their content, but to work together as a team, they also focus on our social emotional learning. So they teach our SEL lessons during their time with the kids. Because I did schedule an hour collaboration every day. So our kids go to specials for an hour. And so part of that hour, our specials teachers teach our social emotional curriculum. And so that's one of the things that kind of combines them all together, is that they're focusing on how to help our behavior school-wide by teaching these lessons, and what else can they do? Because that's the goal that they've written for themselves, is that's how they're going to help us reach our bigger goals. Is, we have better behavior in the classroom, then we're going to be able to learn more. Kids are going to be in classrooms more and stuff like that. So
is what you were saying, while kids are in specials, you utilize that time to do some of this work with teachers, like meet with teachers and stuff?
Yes, that is exactly when we do this work. Yep, because they get an hour every day. And so we meet once a week. They have to meet as a team. Now, the last 3 years, I'll be honest, we've met twice a week sometimes. Like last year and the year before, we've met twice a week as a team, because there were just so much that we're trying to do that once a week wasn't enough. And then we also met after school twice a month as a whole team, so that their whole grade level can get together. Now, I do pay them for that, but after school, but I mean, to be honest, we met a lot, and it was hard. It is hard. The teachers, it was one of their biggest complaints, was like, we meet all the time. And I'm like, I know we do, but this work is important and we can't do it one-on-one. So we're going to have to meet and do this. So this last 3 years have been a lot of meeting, because we started with literacy, but then the next year we added math. And so now you're having to have these team discussions about literacy and math. And so building units in both of them from scratch was, it's a lot of work. And it's taken us 3 years just to get a good rough draft in literacy and math of all of our units. And so being patient and knowing that it's going to take time is important as well. But yeah, no, that hour was important because 40 minutes and 45 minutes wasn't enough time to have those discussions, because by the time they get there and then they'd have to leave to make sure they go get their kids from specials, the time you actually had to talk was very limited. And so if I have an hour, I can get them for a good 45 to 50 minutes of actual work and team discussion.
Right.
So
but if you're doing that, once or twice a week, eventually that time's going to start being really, really beneficial.
It is.
So I was going to ask you, and I know this is kind of off topic, but about you said you have your specials kind of focused on the social emotional aspect. And so they do your social emotional lessons. And so do you involve your counselor with them, and, and does she do any sort of, instructing them or kind of trying to guide them in building those lessons? And if you do, where do you find the time to do that?
Okay, so she's actually on that team. So she's part of the specials team as well. And so we have a behavior support team that's outside of our grade level teams that has the counselor, the assistant principal. We have a behavior interventionist, and it has some grade level teachers on it, and it has the art teacher on it as well. And so they look at our data from our office referrals, and they look to see, okay, what is our data showing us? And that's what actually guides what lessons they're going to teach. Is what are we seeing as the majority of our office referrals? Then, for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks or whatever, this is what we're going to focus our SEL lessons on. This year is going to be a little different coming up because we got a grant and we've actually purchased the Character Strong curriculum. And so they're going to be teaching that as our social emotional. We're still going to use our data to kind of help focus it, but we were writing, they were writing their own lessons and stuff, but now we purchased the curriculum to help them with that. But yeah, they did it as a team, and their counselor was on it to help them with that as they did, because and I'll be honest, we pulled stuff. The internet is our best friend. And so if we need to teach kindness, we went looking for what are some great lessons out there on kindness, and then shared it with everyone and figured out, okay, in art, what is this going to look like? In PE, how could I do this? In library, how can I do this? So that it fits the content they're doing, but still, because they go to a different special every day. So we didn't want each one teaching the same thing. So in art, they were going to teach this part. In library, they're going to teach this part. In PE, they're going to learn this part. So they weren't getting the same lesson 5 days a week. And we're hoping with the Character Strong curriculum, that'll help even more to give them a base to pull from to make it easier. But they only take about 10 to 15 minutes every day to do that. And then they have the rest of it for their actual art, music, PE, whatever it is. But that was the other point of giving them an hour, so that we weren't taking any time from their content area. They still get to teach their content area, but for the extra time that you have in there that you don't normally have, this is what we need you to teach. And I'll be honest, that was hard. That's been hardest for my art teacher, because he's very, like, art is important. I'm like, yes, art is important. So is this. We can't behave, doesn't matter what kind of art you do. Yeah. So I didn't want to leave them behind. So that is still a work in progress for us on how to use our specials and how to, do that. Honestly, it's been easier with grade levels than it has been trying to get everyone else involved in the process as well. All right, some tips. Don't forget, less is more. That is the biggest thing that we have learned. Less essential standards is actually more, because it gives you more time to teach and intervene. Can't have too many of them. And you've got to focus on proficiency and not coverage. And so those conversations you have as a grade level of what proficiency looks like is more important than I taught every standard we had in kindergarten. I don't know why they didn't learn anything. didn't learn anything because you didn't, actually teach them to the standard, the rigor that we needed them to learn that. And then if you don't have this book, this is so some books that this book right here has some really awesome tools in it to help you with this. And one of them is this. It says a survey. Does your team have a guaranteed and viable curriculum? This one is actually free. Well, hold on. It was supposed to be there. Let me share my screen again. On Solution Tree's website, you can actually get this without getting the book. But there's just a survey that you can have your teachers take if they think they have one, and then or not, because some teachers go, yeah, sure, we have one of these. We know what essential and supporting. We know what's important. But this just kind of gives you a way to, if that's where you're at, to see where they are. Do you really have a guaranteed and viable curriculum or not? And so it's just a survey that the teams can take together, take individually and look at the data together to see where they're at in that process. And then the other one in there that I really liked is, if you haven't had this conversation on, you want to get it started, is there are some discussion questions and quotes in there. So it's real short, but it gives a little quote and it gives them a question to think about. And so there's like 3 quotes and 3 questions, and they individually do it. And then they talk as a team to really reflect on why it's important to have a guaranteed and viable curriculum. What does that look like? It kind of gets the discussion started if you've never had to have this discussion before. So it's a good place to start. But there's tools like that. There's a whole chapter on essential standards in this book, and has different tools that you can use and templates and stuff as well. But I really love this book. It was very helpful.
Yeah, that's exactly the type of stuff I need. Just things to get people talking, and ideas in something like that would be very, very helpful.
Here are all the books that I have found helpful. So Learning by Doing is an obvious one. They have a companion to that called Frequently Asked Questions. It's a small book. I didn't bring it with me, but it's a smaller book, and it's a FAQ book that, if you have a specific question, they have a little blurb to help you. They book of tools. This book, Make It Happen, is perfect in conjunction with this one, because this gives you like the overview. This book gives you like coaching questions and step-by-step how to do the things that happen in this book. We didn't find this book until our when we get this, our 2nd or 3rd year. My team found this book and we're like, we wish we would have had this one at the beginning, because as we're coaching our teams, like, it literally gives you, here are some questions you can ask them to get them going, or if they come to this stumbling block, here's some things that you can do. And so my assistant principal, my 2 IFs, and I, we actually read this book together as a book study, so that we could help our teams better as we're coaching them as we go. But we really love the coaching questions and some of the step-by-step guides in this one as well. So that one was helpful for us. And then this one is a new one. It's not been out long, but it's specifically for pre-K to 2nd grade, because sometimes it looks different for us than it does for high school. Like, high school is a whole nother ballgame about what this process is going to look like. So this book was helpful for just some resources on specific to us that would be different for other books or other schools, grade levels. So, and then School Improvement for All is another one that has, ways, how-tos on how to choose essentials, how to do this work with your team. So these are all, like, I literally always have these books sitting behind me. So when I need to know how to do something, or I have a team was struggling with something, these are my go-to books that I go to find ways to help them move to the next step. So like, mine have been sticky noted and highlighted as we've found trouble spots or trying to figure out how to do something. These are the books that help me do that. And then you have got to have a team. This is my team here. This is my assistant principal right here. I could not do my job without her. She is amazing. And these are my 2 IFs. Now, and we were very lucky. This is Diane Kerr. She's my solution tree coach. So we were very lucky to have her help us through the process. But you've got to have a team. You cannot do this by yourself. And these people have made it easier to make it through this process, because you get bogged down at times and it gets hard. It's hard to be the leader sometimes, but these people have made it happen. Like, doing it by yourself, you've got to have a team. Find you someone. I don't know what your layout is like and who your team is, but you need to find one if you don't got one. They're important because they will help you through the times when it gets hard and you want to quit, and they help you get through that.
So do you have any grade level teachers that are on your team, as you say, or is it just assistant principal? I
have 2. So this is my core team. These are the teams that we work on coaching the team stuff, but then we have the guiding coalition. And on my guiding coalition, I have a grade level representative. From each grade level, I have a representative from the special area team. I have a representative from our special ed team, and I have a representative from our paraprofessionals, so that everyone is represented in our school on our guiding coalition. And so that's where we talk about the big areas and how we push this work forward through our whole school. But yes, that team is just as important too. So this is my core team that we really help making sure we're coaching everyone else in the right direction. And our guiding coalition leads the school in the PLC at work process. But you've got to have a guiding coalition. So if you watch that session later, or can't remember if they're doing it multiple times, but seeing Julie and Michael talk about that, your team and who you have on it is important to set the foundation and to move the work forward. Because if you don't have a good team that believes in it and what you're doing, you're not going to be able to move forward, because you're going to have resistors and you're going to need a team that can help you figure out how to get past them. So they are my people.